space is big, really big. You just wouldn't believe how vastly, hugely, mind-bogglingly big it is. I mean, you might think it's a long way down the street to the chemist, but that's just peanuts to space. Listen. That is one of the introductory paragraphs to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Now, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was originally a radio show back in the late 1970s, early 1980s. It then went on to become a series of books. It went on to become a series of LP records. It became a stage play. It became a box set of CDs of the original radio show. And finally, in 2004, it became a film. Now, I personally have absolutely loved all the iterations of Hitchhiker's Guide for nearly 3 decades. But Pascal, you've only recently watched this film for the first time. So what do you think?
What did I think of the film? I thought this was someone entering, a crazy man's mind and trying to make sense of all of this. But I think, frankly, it's a delightful experience to watch the film for the first time, because then you've got to seek out more information about the author of the book, about the producers. You want to understand more about the vision and some of the key messages. So it's a film that, although it's only been a few days for me, it's going to stay with me for quite some time, Roger. But I'm also very aware of its incredible heritage. But it's also, for me, what we're going to call very British, but in a very good way. Only a British author and only a British casting crew production team could pull this off.
Absolutely. And I mean, when you trace it right back to the radio show, the idea of the book being like an electronic gizmo, I mean, in fact, I mean, Douglas Adams was prophesizing the future with this. The original idea for the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was almost like a tablet device you type questions into and it would give you answers. And he'd type in a question like, what is the Earth? And it would go da 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 da, and then the voice would reply in spoken word. And of course that worked perfectly on the radio. But then when they went on to make a TV series, they actually animated the book bits. And of course, everybody said, no, you can't just have a bloke reading a book for 15 minutes on TV. But on the TV, they incredibly animated each of the book segments. Now, in the film, for necessity, they had to trim them down significantly. But even in the film, they still retain the bits of the book, reading out bits about ravenous bug-blatter beasts of Trial and Vogons and things like that. It's a remarkable heritage. And you could almost say that the film is the culmination of 30 years of different iterations of the source material.
And what is interesting is, for me, so all this was happening in the UK, and obviously in France we didn't have it, or certainly I missed it completely. The only time I was aware of its existence was during a school trip in the 80s, where I was well into role-playing games. So I was going from store to store looking for Dungeons and Dragons and other form of RPG items. And in the stores you could buy a role-playing game version of Doctor Who and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But to me, they were like foreign, and I didn't understand any of it. In fact, I thought Doctor Who was a question I was being asked. I was too much into my Dungeons and Dragons and Lord of the Rings type scenario. But so I was aware of it, but never consumed any content. I was aware of the fandom behind it. So suddenly when the movie came out and when I saw the trailer, I remember thinking, wow, this I must see. There was elements, and again, I think it's meant with great affection, elements of the Monty Python in there for me. There was elements of the wit of the written word from English authors that you don't find in your other nations, but also the completely kind of zany. I mean, some of the world, some of the creatures, some of the the characters. So in this movie, we have Sam Rockwell playing Zaphod Beeblebrox, which to me, back to what I was saying a moment ago, sounds like a very badly thought D&D character that you came up with very, very quickly. And the manner in which, within this kind of crazy universe, you have clear messages of issues that were important to Adam Douglas, which is around the environment and conservation, around technology, and ultimately the kind of consequences of having too much power, too much bureaucracy, and of course religion. So it's all in there in 2 hours.
And of course, the whole premise of the film, and this was the premise of the first of the series, was this quest for the ultimate answer to life, the universe, and everything. And there can't be any of us who haven't at one point just sat back and thought, just what is it all about? And of course, what they're saying is that in the massively dim and distant past, people built a computer called Deep Thought and asked that computer to tell them what the answer was to life, the universe, and everything. And of course, the computer says it can do this, but it's going to take 7.5 million years to run the program. And of course, these people are extremely disappointed. They're going to have to wait that long to find out the answer. And then they skip forward in time, and Deep Thought reveals the answer to the question. And of course, the answer is 42. And you've got that sort of crescendo build up to this, and they go, what, 42? 7.5 million years? And that's what we've waited for. And then, of course, the next stage is they've got to build an even bigger computer to actually work out what the actual question was to which the answer was. I mean, it's all complete nonsense, isn't it? But it has that link to reality that, however absurd, you can think, I do want to know what the answer to everything is. And I think that what Douglas Adams achieved with this is writing utter farce and utter fiction, but making it just slightly believable. I mean, the way he describes things like the infinite improbability drive. The infinite improbability drive is a fabulous new way of crossing interstellar distances without all that tedious mucking about in hyperspace. He writes it with such technical authority that you could almost believe that it was technically possible what he's actually saying, which is absurd, but his writing was just incredible. And of course, they've turned that into visuals in the film.
It's true satire like they used to do a few centuries ago. You think about some of the plays of Shakespeare, if you think some of the cartoons, some of the newspapers, being critical of authority figures, but not really revealing who they were talking about. That's really what this movie reminds me of. And there's some real moment where you laugh a lot at the absurdity, and someone should go, that's really clever. And then other times you kind of go, that's a bit scary because we are either in the middle of it, in the case of animal species who are disappearing, the same way the dolphins go, and I'll let you explain that bit in a moment, all the way to the way in which bureaucracy has taken over reason in some part of the world and in some sectors.
Yeah, and the bit about the dolphins, I think this is probably one I can't remember, but it says it is of course, a fact that not many people realise is that man is in fact only the third most intelligent species on the planet Earth. And then it goes on to say that the dolphins are the second ones, and the dolphins actually managed to get fed up with human beings and decided to leave, and they said something like, so long and thanks for all the fish. Yeah. But of course that means that there is still the reveal as to who the most intelligent life forms on the planet are. And I'll leave that one to people who haven't watched the film or read the books or seen the play or listened to the music or whatever it might be. I mean, what I would hope is that if somebody watches this film, it would give them the incentive to go back and immerse themselves in some of the earlier stuff. I have to say, because I grew up with it all, I did find the film a little bit disappointing, possibly because they just had to leave so much out of it. But that's testament to their ability to edit it down into a cohesive unit in an hour and a half, whatever it was. But hopefully it provides a teaser for people to get into the work as a whole.
I think also for me, it felt like the movie was dealt with great. They were very cautious about it in terms of being very respectful of the work of Douglas Adams. There was a lot of his personal friends, so we know that the guy, the voice, is Stephen Fry, who was a personal friend of Douglas Adams. There was also the thing going on, and of course, sadly, Douglas Adams passed away in 2001, so never saw this film. So I think there was a lot of dimensions, which meant that I think the film producers felt perhaps they were treading on eggshells, and there was an enormous following. So it's a bit like now making a Star Wars movie. It must have been easier to do it in the 70s than it is to make a Star Wars movie in 2020 onwards. So for me, my reaction was, having seen the film, I now look forward to reading the book, because I haven't. As I've explained, this was something that I missed completely, because I think the way in which she's chosen the words, the way in which the sentences are constructed for this kind of satire, I think the reading format is going to be thoroughly enjoyable in my view. And to me, the film gives me almost like the taster of getting into Douglas Adams' genius, really.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And there are some, again, for us geeks, in the film, there's a character called Marvin the Paranoid Android. I think you ought to know I'm feeling very depressed. And obviously the robot is very sleek. It's sort of a circular robot with very, very modern looking. And there is one scene in the film set towards the end. If you actually look in the background of the scene, you can actually see the original Marvin, the paranoid android from the TV series, standing in the back of the scene. And I just loved that bit, because everybody in the cinema who has seen the original TV series simultaneously, oh, look, it's the original Marvin that stood there in the background. And that's when you know it's a true Geeks film, when people can spot things like that.
No, absolutely. So what do you think about marketing such a film, which has already decades of history, of support from fans of all ages and genders and so on? It must have been quite tricky, but they went ahead with a trailer that was in line with the movie. It featured the voice of Stephen Fry as the guide, and almost kind of giving an account that would both be appealing to those who knew the universe created by Douglas Adams, but also people like me who were new to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you almost don't know where to begin, because, as you say, you could almost argue that all the previous iterations of the film, book, TV, record, whatever, were all effectively helping to market the film. But that could also have been its Achilles heel, as you said, because the expectations were set so high. So maybe the marketing was a little bit low key because they were scared to raise expectations too high.
So the trailer was released, and we know that it was well received. In fact, back in 2005, it won an award for the Golden Trailer award, which is a ceremony that takes place just to look at the marketing of films, and it got the category of most original, which I think is in line with the film. It's quite an original film after all.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I mean, it's almost hard to categorize. I mean, obviously it's science fiction, but it's just a very, very unique form of science fiction.
So then Stephen Fry again kept busy, because with regard to the film being promoted, they were looking at clever ways to attract the attention of the audience. So Stephen Fry recording what they called additional guide entries that were released back then in on iTunes.
Yeah, I mean, that was absolutely genius, doing that, because, again, his voice is so iconic. The original voice of the book was a guy called Peter Jones, going way back, and the voices are uncannily different. Right. Uncannily similar. Sorry, I should have said uncannily similar. And in fact, there's an absolutely joyous bit, I think, in the radio show. They did some updated versions of the fourth and fifth books. They actually did some radio show versions of them about 20 years after the original set, when the original book or reader had died, and they did this remarkable introduction where they segued the two voices together almost to make it like a glitchy thing, and I just loved the way that they did that. But yeah, and they released the soundtrack as well.
Now
with
that's interesting
all its
because
songs on.
all the songs, but the soundtrack came out almost 2 weeks before the film came out. So again, another way to look after the fans. All songs, including actually the recording of the guy I just mentioned a moment ago with Stephen Fry, so people could enjoy different versions of So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. And Marvin, with his kind of doer statements, had his own remix as well.
Absolutely, yeah. The Marvin mix is always made me laugh. So it was released on the 28th of April 2005 in the UK. A day later in the US. And yeah, I mean, one of the things that I liked as well was the DVD when it came out. I mean, the whole DVD could have been what you get on the screen. Could have been the original idea for what the guide was like, is a video book, the ability to choose what you want to watch, the questions you want to answer. But they kept that quirkiness within the DVD setup, didn't they, with the deleted scenes and the really deleted scenes, and you could even sing along to the songs as well. Absolutely love the way they carried it through.
I think for me, it's part of its charm and appeal. So not only do we have, the experience of, I'm going to listen to Stephen Fry, I'm going to listen to the guys, I'm going to listen to the track and music, then I'm going to see the movie. Then within a matter of a few months, they didn't wait long for the DVD, which I think is a plus, really. Back in the days when you had to wait an entire year. Do you remember those days, Roger?
Yeah.
Now, I think from April, so that was released in September, there's not a lot that goes by. But then you have more. You have audio commentaries, of course. You even have a game where you can play Hangman against Marvin. And of course, a documentary about how they made the film called Don't Crash, which is obviously another nod to some of the key events in the film. And to me, that's what you do. So you create an experience around the core product. So we have a film, which I know is the result of decades of effort in different format, but there's a wraparound which is kind of multimedia. You've got obviously the music, you've got this, you've got the other. Another one that they did was Douglas Adams was actually the producer of the role-playing game, which was back in the 80s, a text-only game. You remember those days where you had to say go north or pick axe and kill monster? Well, he had done a version obviously based on his book, and to celebrate again the release of the film, BBC Radio 4 website had the game available for free to play for a while.
And that game is incredibly hard.
It's
incredibly hard. I mean, you actually do have to know the story of the book in order to play the game, because if you have never read the book, you will have absolutely no chance. You won't even get beyond the first few lines, because it sticks to the narrative of the book so utterly carefully, but it's extremely challenging. Yeah, this was a difficult one to talk about, because you and I have come at it from different approaches. I have this 30 years of, I was obsessed with the Hitchhiker's Guide when I was at school. I used to have the words "Don't Panic" written on the front of my exercise books. And as I say, I can recite so many of the passages, even now, without having to read them. I've got them in my head. And as I say, I used to drive my son mad by doing so.
It's fascinating culturally, because I spent the 80s and just enough of the 90s in France before I came to the UK. I came to the UK in 91. So there's some elements where I've missed it completely. But if you think about what your culture, and by extension the TV and movie industry have gifted the world, you've got Doctor Who, you've got obviously this one here with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you've got people like Quatermass and all those. But it seems to always be linked to technology. Yeah. And the environment, if you think about it, there's always that kind of duality, which I think is fascinating to observe. I mean, just because of my research, we know that obviously Stephen Fry was a good friend of Douglas Adams. Now, Stephen Fry is also tech savvy. He's interested in what you can do with it. Now, Douglas Adams was the first owner of the brand new Mac computer. Stephen Fry was the second.
No.
And I'm sure he didn't let him forget about it.
Fantastic. Pascal, we could go on talking. We could go beyond the film, or we could start talking about the next part of the story, about the restaurants at the end of the universe. If you've done 6 impossible things before breakfast today, why not round it off with breakfast at Millyway's, the restaurant at the end of the universe? You see, I can remember all of these bloody quotes. It's really embarrassing. But I think we are going to have to draw a line under our discussion of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy today. Pascal, thank you as always for being such a good conversationalist in our joint geekdom. And thank you to everyone who's watched the show today and everybody who has listened to the podcast version of the show. Please give us your feedback. Leave comments either on the YouTube channel or just get in touch with us on Twitter or LinkedIn. Let us know what you think. Until the next episode, get out there and make sure that your marketing is done right. I was Roger Edwards and he was Pascal Fintoni.